All right, let's move on to the Bucks and the Celtics. So I thought it was really interesting. After game one, Boston was a 5-point favorite in Vegas. And then they were a 5-point favorite again tonight. And it's just the latest example. Obviously, Vegas is not as clean and cut and dry of a prediction because they're factoring in public money in a lot of those scenarios. However, I thought it was interesting that they didn't overreact to game one. And, I said that Boston would win the series in 5. And after game one, I told you guys that I thought it'd probably be longer because I didn't think Boston would lose one of their first 2 games. And so things are going to stretch longer. It's going to be a longer series. And Milwaukee does have a chance to win, which before the series, I thought they had a very small chance to win. So Milwaukee has shown me a lot to demonstrate that this is going to be a lot more competitive than even I thought it would be. However, our Boston pick for this show, our pick of Boston was not based on like anti-Giannis, sentiment or any sort of hopefulness. It was reacting to information that was right in front of their eyes. Like, guys, I covered the Lakers this year and last year. The vast majority of my followers are Lakers fans. Do you think I stand to gain anything by suddenly becoming a Celtics fan? Like, of course not. All I'm doing is responding to information that's taking place right in front of me. We had a season's worth of data that showed that Boston was the best defense in the league. I had half of a season's worth of data that showed that Boston was by far the best defense in the league. We had, during that span, they were also the best offense in the league. They took a team in Brooklyn that was the preseason title favorite that, yes, didn't fare well in the regular season, but when KD and Kyrie were on the floor, they were a very good team, and Boston just handled them, just completely handled them. They took one of the best basketball players in NBA history at the top of his game and made him struggle worse than I have ever seen him struggle. That's the type of stuff we were seeing from Boston. That's why I picked them. Not because I'm a Celtics fan, not because I dislike Giannis, not because I have some skin in the game. I'm simply reacting to information that happens right in front of me. And that's why Boston was a minus 200 favorite before the series. What happened in game one? Boston defended extremely well in the half court. Boston, on certain offensive possessions, looked good, particularly when they were driving and kicking, getting feet in the paint, and hitting shooters in the pocket for catch-and-shoot opportunities. They really struggled when they went off kilter and tried to force things when they started shooting off the dribble. We talked about how non-Tatum Celtics were 0 for 11 on pull-up jump shots. They had a lot of really bad turnovers. And then when they turned the ball over, Milwaukee scored every single time. Literally every steal that Milwaukee had, they went down and scored. They scored 2.33 points per steal opportunity against Boston. That was where they lost the game. They lost it in transition. Now, there were a lot of other things there. Boston's offense does have some limitations. They have had stretches this year where they've struggled, so that's to be expected at certain stretches, but that's all been factored in when we're making these predictions. I thought it was really interesting what Ime Udoka said before the game. Stan Van Gundy was talking about it in the opening minutes. Ime Udoka's major takeaways from game one were no early clock contested threes, which is exactly what we talked about. How many times you'd see Jaylen Brown come down the floor, get a ball screen, and just pull up a three with 17 on the shot clock when he's open, but it's not really that open. You know what I mean? There's a lot of that kind of stuff. And then Ime Udoka said he wanted multiple drive-in kicks, which is something we talk about a ton on this show. The concept of further compromising the defense with each progressive action, turning a good shot into a great shot. And you do that by perpetually applying rim pressure and kicking out to shooters. In this game, I talked a lot about how in the first game, part of the reason why Boston struggled so much from 2 was the types of shots they were taking and the fact that nothing was really all that high quality of a shot. Well, in this game, after only attempting, I think they were 10 for 24 from 2-point range in game 1, they attempted 37 twos tonight. And they were 18 for 37. And a big part of that was early in the game, they generated quality three-point shots. And with those quality three-point shots, they loosened up the defense. They went 20 for 43 from 3 tonight. That's an awesome percentage. That's what Milwaukee's defense gives up. I keep seeing things. I keep seeing it from Stan Van Gundy, too. Like, Boston has to find a way to score twos. Boston has to find a way to score at the rim. They're not going to. Milwaukee plays 2 centers, sometimes 3. 2 of them are premier shot blockers, and no matter what, one of them is directly under the basket. So be my guest if you want to try to score over that all night long. The most realistic way to try to score is to loosen things up from the perimeter first and then take advantage of opportunities as they come around the basket. But Ime Udoka, obviously we work hard at this show to try to watch the film and to be, aware of what's actually happening on the court. And I thought it was cool that Ime Udoka mentioned some things that we specifically talked about on this show. Moving on to Jaylen Brown. Carson asked me, before the game, he said, who's the guy that's most important for Boston to be able to figure this out? And I said it was Jaylen Brown. And it's because of the fact that, not only did he play poorly in game 1, but it's not even like he's a role player. This guy's a star. He's a two-way star. Is he Paul George? No. But he's, a tier right below that. He's a guy that on any given night can create shots for himself at all 3 levels of the floor. He did a lot of scoring from the mid-range tonight. We showed you guys those shot charts last night, and I talked about how Boston needed more variety in their shot selection. Well, Jaylen Brown and Al Horford, between the two of them, I think made 4 or 5 mid-range shots just in the first quarter after they made 0 mid-range shots in game 1. Adding that variety makes you tougher to guard. And you started to see that they were all open too. The Al Horford shot was wide open. The Jaylen Brown step backs, like the defender is overplaying the paint. So when he does that hard pound dribble into that step back between his legs, he's getting tons of separation. Those are open shots. And as a result, Jaylen had a monster night. He had 30 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists. He was 11 for 18 from the field, 6 for 10 from 3. He was demonstrating all of that shot making. He was definitively either the best or second best player on the floor tonight after being like the 10th or 11th best player in game 1. That's that influx of talent that makes the big difference in the outcome of the game. Boston's defense is something we've talked a ton about on the show, but there are a couple of specific impacts that make them so interesting. And the biggest thing is, for those of you guys who've been following me over the last couple of years, the big reason why I talk so much about switching defenses is because switching defenses stagnate NBA offenses. You can't run actions. You can't just, run a staggered screen for a shooter coming off. It's not going to gain you an advantage because whoever's guarding the second screener is just going to grab the shooter as he's coming out. Or if you're running a flex action, or if you're running complicated pick and rolls, or whatever it is you're doing, a good switching defense will simply be one step ahead of you, and there's just going to be somebody waiting for you when you're coming off the screen and nothing is really open, and it turns you into an isolation team. And I thought it was really interesting that the Bucks made 34 field goals tonight, and they only had 16 assists. So literally 18 of their 34 made field goals were unassisted, meaning even when they did score, for the most part, it was in isolation scenarios, and it stagnates you. It makes it harder for you to score. Milwaukee only had 86 points in this game. Again, the important impact of stagnation is it throws everybody out of rhythm. It's hard for everybody to feel confident and feel in a flow if the ball's not really popping around. And the ball doesn't really pop around against switching defenses because nobody's really open. Everyone's kind of staying home, and they're trying to bait you into playing ISO ball, into playing your turn, my turn ball. Boston's been really effective at doing that all year, and they did it really, really well tonight. A huge part of what made that work was discovering that they could single cover Giannis on most of the possessions. So in game 1, Grant Williams really struggled. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that Boston wasn't hitting him enough when he was open at the 3-point line. There were a bunch of missed opportunities there. Obviously, he had a great offensive night tonight. But in game 1, only Al Horford demonstrated that he could guard Giannis on an island. But in game 2, immediately in the first quarter, Grant Williams came out and clearly demonstrated that he was not going to be ran over, that he was going to hold his ground and make Giannis shoot over the top. That put them in a situation where now, because they had 2 guys that they could cover Giannis in single coverage with, it made things a lot more difficult for Giannis. Now, he struggled mightily in the first half. In the second half, he started to get going just by relentlessly trying to pressure guys like Grant and Al Horford. They did a lot better job of clearing the side and putting him in the post and making it so that he had a little bit more space to operate. But for the most part, they had some success. Giannis, we talked about, I am relenting now. He's the best basketball player in the world. I will admit it. So, obviously, he's going to eventually break through that wall and have some success. And he did in the second half. But it's a very, very interesting, tool to have in your toolbox for Boston to know that, for the most part, Grant Williams and Al Horford can do a decent job in single coverage on Giannis. And the last note on Boston's offense, they took much better care of the basketball. We talked about how Milwaukee scored on just about every single steal that they had. Well, Milwaukee only had 6 fast break points in this game after having 28 fast break points in game one. Taking away that supplementary offense for Milwaukee trapped them in the half court all night long. And Boston's half court defense was excellent in game one. It was even better tonight in game two, and it was a big part of why they were able to get so many stops. I wanted to talk about Giannis for a little bit. So, Giannis, he struggled really badly in that first half, had some success in that second half. There's a lot of talk about the way that he's officiated. My issue with it is I don't have any problem with Giannis being physically aggressive. I don't have any problem with LeBron being physically aggressive. I don't have any problem with Joel Embiid being physically aggressive. My thing is leeway. If you are going to give leeway for Giannis to drop his shoulder and try to run people over, then you have to give leeway to the defensive player back to be physical in return. You can't be by the book with the defensive player on Giannis and then give Giannis all sorts of leeway with off arms and dropping his shoulder and player control fouls and all that stuff. Because there's by the book stuff on offense too that says that if a player has position, you're not allowed to run him over. That, you're not allowed to drop your shoulder. You're not allowed to extend an off arm. There are a lot of things that the offensive player is not allowed to do. I've talked about this a lot on the show. I have no issue with the fact that LeBron doesn't get many foul calls because I think LeBron initiates a ton of contact. So my thing is let LeBron play LeBron ball. Let the defender be physical back. And I feel the same way with Giannis. There was a few plays there in that second half where it started to kind of feel like the refs didn't know what to do with Giannis. And that's kind of the predicament he puts you in. It's a credit to Giannis. Again, it's just like with the Joel Embiid thing. This is not an insult to Giannis. This is an issue with officiating in the way that they are inconsistent. There was a play in the second half where Giannis barreled down the lane and ran over Robert Williams. Just completely ran him over and got a layup. It was called an and one. Then on the very next trip down, Jayson Tatum is posting up on Grayson Allen and just does a basic back down dribble, and Grayson Allen flops and they call an offensive foul. You can't give leeway to Giannis if you're not going to give it to other players on the court. That's just my little 2 cents. I know I complain about officiating all the time. It's just, I'm a big believer in letting guys play basketball and refs being less involved. And I know it's really tough with Giannis, but there needs to be, again, all I'm saying is I don't want to see Giannis living at the free throw line when he's running people over. Make him play basketball the same way that every other player in the league is supposed to play. One of the interesting things about having Grant Williams and Al Horford in single coverage is it forces Giannis to be more of a shot maker. And tonight he had a 3 in transition in the second half. He had a little mid-range jump shot that he made in the second half. But for the most part, they made him shoot over the top, and he struggled in that department. And that's his one specific weakness. Giannis has demonstrated that he's come miles as a playmaker. He obviously is the best paint scorer that we have in the league. He's, one of the best defensive players that we have in the league. His one hole is half-court shot making. And one of the things that's going to be tested over the course of the series is, Boston's going to try to bait him into taking those shots. And in the first half, he did. He took a lot of jump shots. In the second half, he was much more deliberate about hey, if you're going to put Grant Williams and Al Horford on me, I'm going to try to run you over. Even if I don't get calls, even if I miss shots, I'm going to try to wear you down. And that kind of goes to that concept that we were talking about, after game one, where Giannis forced a lot of things in traffic. And I talked about the cumulative effect of rim pressure. If you just keep doing that over the course of a 7-game series, as the games progress, as we get later into the series, it gets harder and harder to build that wall. It gets harder and harder to hold your ground. And there is probably going to be a monster Giannis game later in this series where Boston struggles to build that wall and he gets 46 points with 12 or 13 dunks. That's just kind of the natural order of things. Boston, we talked a lot about how after game one, Boston played scared, that they were deferential to Giannis, that they seemed to be kind of trapped in his aura. I thought from the opening tip tonight, they threw that right out the window and they were no, screw that. We don't care that he's Giannis. We're going to play basketball the way that we want to play. That's the way they have to be. If you play scared, you're dead on arrival. Last note before we move on. Milwaukee did play a little bit better in the second half. This is that fake comeback concept. I never like getting too, wrapped up in second half comebacks when you fall into a massive deficit, because almost always, if you're a team like Boston, especially a team like Boston that has some guys that are banged up, like Marcus Smart obviously missed this game. They have 3 days off until Saturday. Jaylen Brown's dealing with a hamstring thing. There's a tendency to be like, we're up 25. Let's just escape. Like, let's just get out of here with a win and move on, rather than going for the jugular. It's obviously you'd prefer to see teams stay aggressive down the stretch, but it's a lot easier said than done. I thought that was a big part of why Milwaukee did sort of threaten. But here's the reality. Even in that second half where Milwaukee played better, they only scored 46 points. So for all of that talk about, Milwaukee getting quality looks at the rim and Boston struggling to get shots at the rim, well, guess what? Milwaukee still only scored 46 points. So it's not like they had some massive offensive revelation in that second half. The only real takeaway I got in terms of like something to move forward with Giannis, there were two things. One, when they used Giannis as a screener, Boston was just hugging up on the screener, which instead of playing pick and roll coverages, like having a guy in drop coverage or showing on the screen or trapping or anything like that, they were just hugging onto Giannis, which effectively makes it like a double screen. And so the guy who was guarding the ball handler kept getting caught on that screen, and Milwaukee was getting into the paint off of that. Boston's going to have to figure out some adjustments there. And then one last thing, one of the ways that Giannis started to have success against Al Horford and Grant Williams was clearing the side. Instead of having him attack in the middle of the floor where Giannis was struggling with understanding where help was coming from, they spaced everybody out past the three-point line, like 5 feet out past the three-point line, put Giannis on that left block, and they were just like, here's the entire floor for you. It puts the Boston help defenders in a weird position where they don't know if they're supposed to help because their offensive players so far away, or if they're supposed to stay home. And Giannis had some success there. So that's definitely something that they're going to want to go to in game 3 to try to get Giannis going. But hey, this is the bounce back game from Boston. Just like I said, don't take victory laps after game 1. I'm not going to take a victory lap after game 2. Yes, I think Boston's the better team. Yes, I think they're going to win the series. I was wrong in the sense that it's not going to be a walkover. Milwaukee's going to have some, they're going to win probably at least one of these 2 games here in Milwaukee next week or on Saturday. So Saturday, Monday. So this isn't over by any stretch. Even if you're a Boston fan, there's no way to, no time to relax. However, what was encouraging tonight in terms of my prediction was I started to see some of the things materialize that I saw on tape over the course of the last 6 months, which obviously, your team tells you who they are over the big sample size, not over the small sample size. And over a big sample size, Boston has demonstrated to us that they were the best team in the league. Here tonight, they demonstrated it again. They're going to have to demonstrate it 3 more times in order to get out of this round.